With the election season in Israel officially open, joining us from Tel Aviv to take a look at how things stand and just how the race might turn out is analyst Tom Gross. Tom, welcome. Great to have you on Prime Time. Now, this is set to be the first full term of one Israeli government since 1973. That is quite a long time. What are the opinion polls saying right now? And what's the sentiment in Israel ahead of this election?
Yes, actually, I believe it's the first full term since 1988, not 73, but still, that's more than 50 years. Before this particular government, which has lasted the full 4 years, there were four elections in just over 4 years. The governments were lasting often only a few months and then collapsing. So it is actually a tribute to Prime Minister Netanyahu's political acumen that he's managed to hold this government together right until the end of the term, October 27th, which is the last day by law that they can call elections. And just to remind people, Netanyahu, he's not just the longest serving prime minister, it's quite remarkable. He first was elected 30 years ago in 1996. He's won six elections since then, but there've also been five other prime ministers in between during that time from different center and left wing and one right wing party, Barak and Sharon and Olmert and Bennett and Lapid. So he keeps on making comebacks. So one thing we should be clear about is you can never rule him out, whatever the polls say. Now, regarding the polls, there's a new party led by a former army chief of staff, a centrist party led by a man called Gadi Eisenkot, and he has surprisingly emerged as the leading opposition party, overtaking another opposition party that's jointly led by two former prime ministers. It's a centrist party. It's led by Lapid, Lapid, and by Naftali Bennett. So it's true that the polls indicate that Netanyahu has a less than 50% chance of reforming a government. However, the opposition is so divided into so many different parties that this can play into Netanyahu's hands. And in Israel, it's not about winning 50% of the votes. It's about being able to put together a coalition of many parties. And he may be in a position where he's able to do that, even if his party has not got the most seats, he may still be able to form a coalition, whereas the opposition are quite divided. And you have, for example, secular parties that do not want to go into coalition with ultra-Orthodox Jewish parties, and vice versa. You have Arab Israeli parties, and they have some nationalist opposition parties that don't feel comfortable going into government with Arab parties who may not recognize Israel as a Jewish state, like the nationalist parties do. So it's not clear at all who's going to win this election, and it's everything's up for grabs.
And Tom, have we already seen some coalition pledges? Has the opposition already perhaps offered up what it will base its campaign off of?
Well, um, they are criticizing Netanyahu for several things. First of all, they say that he was the leader on the worst attack Israel suffered in Israeli history, October 7th, 2023, and therefore he should bear responsibility for not having prepared Israeli defenses to withstand that massacre of October 7th, 2023, and he should not be re-elected. They also say that he's a divisive character. He's accused of corruption, though he and his supporters fiercely deny that and say it's a kind of political stitch up job against him. Working in his favor is a remarkably robust Israeli economy. In spite of all the wars Israel has been through and all the difficulties, the Israeli economy is one of the most robust in the world. The Israeli stock market's up almost 140% since the last election 4 years ago. The Israeli currency, the shekel, is up about 18% against the dollar. Unemployment is low, and so on. So, in other countries, they famously say it's the economy, stupid. Based on that, Netanyahu may get re-elected. Based on security, there is a feeling that he has not done enough to protect Israeli citizens, both on October 7th and also that the wars with Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon and with the Islamic regime in Iran, none of those three wars has been decisively won by Israel. Israel has pushed back very hard against Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Iranian government, but all three entities are still standing, and therefore Netanyahu is criticized for not having decisively won any of those three wars.
And there you mentioned the domestic criticism. The Netanyahu government also faced international criticism, of course, for quite different reasons over the wars in Gaza, Lebanon, and Iran. How can that, and can it even, impact the upcoming election?
Well, very little, because look, you have some far left parties who are joining in some of the fiercest international critics and calling Netanyahu a war criminal and so on. But those parties may not even get into the Knesset. They represent only a tiny proportion of Israelis. And in fact, there are many in Israel who think Netanyahu has not been tough enough, and he's been too hesitant in these wars. And these people are not just necessarily on the right. Two of the opposition parties, the Israeli Labour Party, which has now renamed itself the Democrats, is led by a former general who is speaking very tough. And Eisenkot, who I just mentioned, who's neck and neck in the polls, who's a centrist, is also talking very tough. So the international criticism, the opposition use it to say, he's making Israel unpopular and so on. But if people abroad are expecting policy differences, I don't think so. The policy differences are on other issues like the balance between religion and state, or the role of the judiciary, or whether the ultra orthodox should be forcibly conscripted into the army. They don't tend to be about whether or not Israel should robustly defend themselves, as Israelis would see it, against Hezbollah and Hamas. There is a kind of, 80 to 90% support over those issues.
And how much of a role could signals from Washington play this fall? And could a role be played by the public sentiment in the United States as well?
Well, yes, and obviously, Trump and President Trump being who he is, blows hot and cold. One moment he says admiring stuff about Netanyahu, and the next moment he's very downright rude about him. But at this point, because because Trump is really all over the place, I think that in Israel, as in much of the rest of the world, people take a little bit with a pinch of salt what he says. One thing that does work in Netanyahu's favor is his English is absolutely fluent. Some people say he speaks better English than a lot of English people or Americans, whereas Eisenkot, his main rival, he doesn't really speak English at all. And that people may think, look, it's very important for Israel to have a prime minister, given the fact it's so involved in international affairs and international pressure. It's very important to have a prime minister who does speak fluent English. And even Netanyahu's critics who can't stand him will admit that he's quite, not the gift of gab, so to speak. He's very fluent. He's able to to think on his speech, deliver an interview very fluently in English on an American TV network or when speaking to American politicians. So I'm not sure that international pressure will be very relevant in this election, one way or the other.
Thank you so much for joining us on Primetime and offering your analysis. We did check those numbers, and it is the first election that is happening right on schedule since 1988. Thank you so much.
Right. Right. Thank you. Have a good evening.